Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. She drifted into the living room with a grace that bordered on theatrical, every inch of her presentation curated to perfection. The timeless black dress hugged her figure just right, complemented by scarlet-soled heels that lifted her an exact 3 inches. No more, no less. There wasn't a single visible strap, no betraying line of fabric, as if even the notion of undergarments had been deemed superfluous. A pity, really. Such meticulous effort, and not a shred of it for my sake. I took another slow sip of my old-fashioned, my third for the evening, bracing myself the way men do when they sense an inevitable storm gathering on the horizon. Tonight, against all logic and reason, my wife was about to ask me to compromise everything I held dear. I could read her movements as easily as one follows a well-worn script. 13 years of shared history, spanning both courtship and marriage, had rendered her tactics predictable, as familiar as the ticking of a clock. "Axel, we need to talk." As expected, she wielded that wretched nickname like a weapon, the one I had loathed since adolescence. My name is Alexander, never shortened, never modified. The way she used it wasn't endearing. It was calculated, designed to drag me back to those awkward, lanky years when bullies tormented me before I finally grew into my frame. That was the risk of loving a psychologist, handing her the most fragile pieces of my past, only for her to wield them like tools of manipulation. "Easy, darling. Can't this wait until morning?" I deflected smoothly, disrupting the rhythm of her premeditated speech before she could fully settle into it. She expected shock, maybe outrage, some dramatic response to her attire, perhaps a pleading inquiry. "Where do you think you're going, dressed like that?" Or maybe she thought I'd retreat into my drink, crushed and silent. But I gave her none of it. I let the quiet stretch, forcing her to steer the conversation forward. "Aren't you even curious where I'm going?" "And with whom, Alexander?" she pressed. There it was. She had abandoned the nickname. Her little psychological game was already slipping through her fingers. "I already know both answers," I said evenly, "and frankly, I don't care." Her breath hitched just slightly. For a fleeting second, she faltered, as if the foundation beneath her had shifted unexpectedly. To her credit, she recovered quickly, though I imagine those few seconds must have felt like an eternity to her. "Oh, little Axel," she sneered, latching onto condescension in a last-ditch effort to regain control. "And just what is it that you think you know?" There it was, her true self, stripped of pretense. "Chloe, the who is Andrew Wright. You met him at that club, the one without a jacket policy. You spent the evening dancing with him, ignoring my objections, dismissing my concerns. We fought about it later, remember? I warned you, don't let him steal your heart. A direct hit. As for the where, I assume it involves a bed and an enthusiastic interpretation of biblical scripture. If I'm mistaken, by all means, correct me." She didn't flinch. If anything, she leaned into it. "Aren't you just unbearably smug?" "Yes, I'm meeting Andrew tonight. And no, I'm not pretending anymore. You can either accept it or destroy yourself in the divorce. Take half my money, half my company, the one you had no role in building, and watch yourself wither into nothing while still paying me alimony. Meanwhile, I'll be enjoying life with Andrew. Sound about right?" I let her say it for me. "Exactly," she confirmed, her lips curling into a smirk. "You always were a spineless little man. I spent years wondering why I even married you, beyond the security you provided. You have nothing else to offer." I chuckled, genuinely amused. "You might be right, Chloe. Maybe I am insignificant. My one mistake? Giving you my heart. But everything else? That's a different story." She adjusted her wrap, primed for her grand exit. But I wasn't finished. "Before you leave, Chloe, you might want to hear me out. There's nothing left to discuss, Axel. I own you. Accept it." She had no idea just how wrong she was. I held my drink steady, resisting the simmering rage threatening to dictate my next move. 13 years together, Chloe. The least you can do is give me a few more minutes before running into Andrew's arms. It won't change anything, she scoffed. But if it soothes your wounded pride, go ahead. I sighed. Your first betrayal was a wake-up call. The second was confirmation. I saw it with my own eyes, Chloe. That was the moment you stopped existing for me. If you were drowning, I wouldn't extend a hand. She rolled her eyes. So what? You've been getting off on the humiliation? Or are you really just that much of a coward? There's a third option. I knew where this was heading, so I made a plan. 5 months, not 5 years, no grand strategy, just decisive action. Fact 1. Courts favor women or bleed both sides dry. So I had a choice. Let you take everything, or make sure there was nothing left to take. Fact 2. Assets can't be divided if they no longer exist. Her eyes narrowed. Remember how I convinced you to transfer the house and cars to my company for tax benefits? That was step 1. Now the corporation owns everything. She smirked. And I own the corporation, genius. That means I still own you. Step 2 was selling the company. The smirk vanished. You what? And since you so graciously signed off on all financial decisions, the proceeds from that sale are long gone. But don't worry, you do get half of my remaining assets, which, as of right now, amount to absolutely nothing. Her face contorted with fury, but beneath it, I saw something new. Fear. You think this is funny? You'll be broke too. For a while. But unlike you, I built my success from the ground up once. I can do it again. I drained the last of my old-fashioned and set the glass down with finality. You lose, Chloe. You get nothing. She actually raised her hand. Just like that, we were back in grade school. With a nod, I signaled her to go on. But your salary? What about that? Unless you officially quit, you're still technically employed. And then there's your retirement fund, right? She was hunting for a loophole. I gave a small shrug. You're not wrong. That was part of phase 3. I sold the company, but the agreement required me to stay on in my role, at least until I was officially served. My paycheck? $1 a month. Her confidence faltered. I pushed ahead. As for my retirement fund, I cashed it out early, took the penalty, and walked away with what was left. Then, in a stroke of absolute brilliance, I took the money to Vegas to catch up with some old friends. Lost every last cent, and then some. Now, I owe them an amount that's uncomfortable. At some point in the future, hopefully not anytime soon, they'll come calling for payback. The idea made me chuckle. Either that, or they'd come for my kneecaps. Sal might be the closest thing I have to family, but he has an image to uphold. This entire situation felt almost absurd. Are you seriously telling me that Sal Manila is in the mob? She blurted, wide-eyed. Technically, Chloe, that was an interruption, I noted dryly. But I get it. Hard not to react to that one. I glanced at Andrew, who looked like he was questioning every decision that had led him here. I exhaled. But let's not pretend I'm completely heartless. I've got a sliver of mercy left, and I'd rather not burn through it all at once. She caught herself before speaking again, which I respected. So, to summarize, I continued, we're drowning in debt, owed to Sal, to the banks, to the credit cards that have kept us off the streets. And you, Chloe, are in even deeper than I am. I just couldn't tell you until the timing was right. She stayed silent. I leaned back. That's the whole story. If you want out, go. I finalized everything a few days ago. Oh, and I took the liberty of removing the keylogger you installed to spy on me. I knew exactly what you were planning. Her eyes widened in shock. And if you're wondering why Andrew hasn't reached out yet, well, that's because I disabled your phone while you were in the shower. I couldn't risk you recording any of this. I had to control the narrative until the moment was right. If you'd caught on too soon, it would have ruined everything. Not that I needed to worry. Chloe had been thoroughly distracted tonight. Her little rendezvous had consumed all of her attention. I took a sip of my drink. But you didn't notice. And for that, I thank you. I stood. The paperwork will arrive soon. I've already secured temporary arrangements elsewhere, so you can stay here until the new corporate owners formally kick you out. As for me, the only things I care about in this place are the clothes on my back, this drink, and the rest of this whiskey. You can keep the sugar and bitters. Just like you, they're easily replaced. Tears welled in her eyes. What happens now? She asked, barely above a whisper. We go our separate ways, I said, my voice calm. I'd tell you not to lose my number, but... Alexander? She choked out, her voice breaking. I smiled. Small, sharp. There it is. My real name. For the last time, as far as you're concerned. Turning away, I delivered my final words. Lose my number. We ended up in court. Her lawyer, backed by Andrew's money, went after spousal support, citing hypothetical future earnings and, of course, retribution for my financial maneuvers. The judge wasn't buying it. He refused to impose payments based on mere speculation. However, he left the door open for her attorney to refile if I secured legitimate employment within the next year. Slim odds of that happening. Stream Inca LLC, the company that had acquired mine, was more than willing to fund my recovery. Apparently, the emotional devastation of my gambling addiction, paired with PTSD from my ex-wife's cruelty, justified an extended stay at a private villa in Palermo. Officially, the facility belonged to a mutual friend. Patient population, just me. Staffed with a surplus of gorgeous nurses and therapists. I had always wanted to use the phrase "a friend of mine" in that particular way. Ever since 9th grade, when a short, dark-skinned classmate and I had enough and stood up to the school's biggest bully. We got our asses handed to us, but in that shared humiliation, a lifelong friendship was forged. Side note, it's probably best not to pick a fight with the only son of a Sicilian. You never know who his father is, or who his father knows. If not for Sal, I doubt I could have walked away with even half my money. But thanks to the bruises we earned together back in high school, I managed to keep nearly 90%. Not a bad return, if you think of it as an investment. I kicked a portion back to Sal as a token of appreciation. Even between brothers, it's good form to let your friend wet his beak. Always wanted to say that. The rest? That went toward hiring someone in Sal's circle. Because Andrew needed to learn a lesson. He needed to understand that interfering with a married woman, my wife, came with repercussions. Nothing extreme, just enough to ensure he fully grasped his mistake. By the time the night was over, he'd know exactly what it meant to gamble and lose, just like I had in Vegas. Except in his case, the stakes were much, much higher. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. For the last 20 minutes, he had silently watched his captivating wife move gracefully across the ballroom floor, her steps so impeccably timed that as the clock struck midnight, she was positioned at the farthest point from him. Surrounded by her affluent, pretentious circle, she seemed more like a prized dish being passed around at a feast, kissed, touched, and admired by the executives from his firm. His boss, an entitled heir who had done little to earn his wealth, seemed especially taken with her. None of this was surprising. For the past 2 years, the company's New Year's Eve celebration had followed this same humiliating pattern. The first time, he chalked it up to the intoxicating effects of champagne, but last year had left no room for doubt, compelling him to make plans. A light tug at his sleeve drew his attention. Turning, he found Rebecca, his wife's closest confidant and partner in crime, standing beside him. "Happy New Year, Kyle," she chirped, leaning in for her customary half-hearted kiss on the cheek. He barely acknowledged the gesture, stepping back to meet her gaze. Usually brimming with smugness, as if her aristocratic lineage granted her some innate superiority, Rebecca's expression tonight carried an unusual mix of discomfort and pity. "Kyle, don't be so stern," she said softly, her tone almost pleading. "It's just a silly tradition. She's only sharing a few harmless kisses. She'll come back soon, and everything will be fine. You know she loves you." He scrutinized her, unimpressed by the platitude. Rebecca pressed on, her voice turning conciliatory. "She does love you, Kyle. Whitney's just vivacious and spontaneous. She thrives on socializing with people who share her energy. You're the quiet, thoughtful one. She needs that balance. Spending time with them only makes her value you more." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Is that so? Was that what she was doing under the mistletoe at the Christmas party? Because I saw her kissing every senior executive in her office. And now, here she is again, dancing, kissing, and cozying up to my colleagues. So, by your logic, the more she gets close to everyone else, the more she appreciates me?" Rebecca flinched. "You're misinterpreting—" "Am I?" he interrupted. "Does her appreciation include making out with George, the guy she knows I can't stand? Is this her unique way of showing love, since she's well aware of how much I despise him?" Rebecca's face turned crimson as she looked away. "Kyle, please. I know this is difficult, but for the first time in 5 years, Rebecca, I actually understand," he said, cutting her off. "I really do." Without waiting for her response, he strode to their table and retrieved a large, brightly wrapped package from his briefcase. Taking off his wedding ring, he tied it securely to the ribbon atop the gift. Then he turned back to Rebecca, his expression calm and resolute. "Give this to Whitney when she's done charming the crowd. Wish her a happy new year from me. I hope 2025 brings her everything she truly deserves." "Kyle, wait!" Rebecca grabbed his arm, her voice desperate. "Don't leave. I'll bring her back. She's just had too much champagne again. She needs you to take her home." "No, Rebecca, she doesn't." His tone was steady, almost serene. "She's been here all day, preparing for this spectacle. She has her own room, her own car, and more than enough admirers to look after her. And you've known all along, haven't you? You've lied to me before, not this time." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away. As he exited the ballroom, he nodded briefly at Helen, the HR director, who was standing with her towering husband. Helen had spent the afternoon assisting him as his boss, and others made their arrangements at the hotel, a plan that had involved Whitney in a lavish suite. Kyle had documented everything, and so had Helen. Soon the board of directors would see it too. As Kyle disappeared into the night, Helen and her husband moved purposefully toward Whitney. Meanwhile, Rebecca pushed her way through the throng of admirers surrounding her friend. When she finally reached Whitney, she thrust the garishly wrapped package toward her. "Kyle left this for you," Rebecca said, her voice tight with strain. "He's gone. He watched everything tonight, and when you started kissing everyone, he decided he'd had enough. He wanted you to have this." Whitney's lips curved into a confident smile. "Oh, Kyle," she said dismissively. "He's just sulking. I'll fix things when I get home. He always forgives me. Even when he's upset, he leaves me gifts." Ignoring Rebecca's attempt to stop her, Whitney untied the ribbon. When the ring fell to the floor, her smile faltered. George, who had been standing nearby, stooped to pick it up with a smirk. "Isn't this your husband's wedding ring?" he asked mockingly, holding it up for her to see. Whitney stared at the ring, her confusion growing, and hastily unwrapped the box. "It's heavy," she muttered, giving it a shake. As she broke the seal, its contents spilled onto the floor. Glossy photographs scattered across the tiles. A hush fell over the room. Whitney, her gown pooling around her, knelt to gather the photos, her hands trembling. The faces in the images came into focus, and her gasp of shock quickly turned into a horrified scream. Rebecca, pale and visibly shaken, crouched beside her, trying to steady her. Nearby, George picked up one of the photos, his expression darkening as he recognized himself. "What the hell, Whitney?" he snarled, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. More eyes fell to the photos, revealing compromising images of Whitney with George and others. The tension in the room snapped. One woman slapped her husband with a resounding crack, following it with a sharp jab to his chest. "So this is why you're never home," she shouted, grabbing a handful of photos to show to other wives. "You all might want to take a look at these. Plenty of familiar faces here." The ballroom descended into chaos. Whitney, overwhelmed, fainted, collapsing unceremoniously onto George's polished shoe. Rebecca frantically tried to revive her as the crowd buzzed with scandal and accusation, but the damage had already been done. Far from the chaos, Kyle walked away without a glance back. A woman raised a USB drive high, her voice cutting through the clamor. "Look, USB drives too. Who knows what secrets they hold?" Nearby, chaos erupted as a furious blonde berated a sharply dressed older man. "You lowlife! Remember our prenup? I'll make sure you lose everything." "Please, baby, I'm sorry," he pleaded, his tone desperate. "It meant nothing. She kept throwing herself at me. I slipped, but only once. She's not even close to you." "You lying piece of trash!" she screamed, rage spilling over. Rising from the floor, she charged at him, brandishing incriminating photos, her curses ringing out. He stumbled backward before breaking into a full sprint as she gained ground. Elsewhere, a woman sobbed uncontrollably, clutching a photo to her chest, while her husband stood silently beside her, his face buried in his hands. Another man thrust a photo at a striking woman, his voice trembling with anger. "You're bi? Really? You've been lying to me all this time? You swore you'd never do a threesome because you wouldn't be with another woman," he bellowed. Her cheeks flamed red as she turned on her high heels and fled, wobbling with every step. In the midst of the uproar, another woman gathered a pile of photos and began shouting names as she stormed through the ballroom. She stopped in front of a bewildered woman, handed her a picture, and watched as realization dawned. Fury twisted the woman's features as she turned toward her husband, photo in hand. Her steps quickened as he backed away in panic. This chaotic scene repeated itself across the room, each incident drawing gasps and murmurs from the horrified onlookers. Meanwhile, Whitney, now conscious, sat dazed on the floor, her glazed eyes taking in the turmoil. A man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo knelt beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, her voice empty. "I'm Whitney Wright." His brow furrowed. "The Whitney Wright?" She nodded again. "Who are you?" she asked weakly. He pulled out a packet of papers, snapped her photo, and said, "I'm a process server. You've been served, Whitney Wright." The room fell silent as he continued, his voice cutting like a knife. "These documents outline and substantiate Kyle Wright's adultery allegations in his divorce filing. Enclosed are photos and videos proving her infidelity." He addressed the crowd with calculated precision. "For those who missed the evidence, the divorce filings, publicly available, list every name, date, and place of Whitney's affairs. For a nominal fee, I can provide a link to the complete archive. If you suspect your spouse was involved, I also offer digital evidence packages, priceless in court. Contact me online." With a dramatic bow, he exited, leaving the room in stunned disarray. The fallout was swift and merciless. Whitney collapsed into her friend Rebecca's arms, sobbing inconsolably, the divorce papers clutched in her trembling hands. The admiration she once commanded had turned to disdain, pity, and disgust. The weight of her disgrace crushed her. "Collect those photos and burn them," George barked at his staff. Turning to Helen, his voice dripped with venom. "Draft a reprimand for Kyle Wright and have his termination ready by Monday." Helen remained composed. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Taylor. Kyle resigned earlier today. He gave 2 weeks' notice, cleared his desk, and left." "I won't accept his resignation," George roared. "I'll fire him and make sure he's blacklisted." Helen's expression didn't waver. "That won't work, sir. He met with the chairman, your father, who accepted his resignation. Kyle has already secured a new position with one of our consulting partners." George's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson as Helen and her husband exchanged triumphant glances, quietly savoring his frustration. Far away, Kyle Wright was already on the road, cruising south in his custom Chevrolet Suburban. His route to Austin, Texas, wound through scenic rural landscapes, and he intended to enjoy every mile. Leaving behind the frenetic city life, he planned to explore charming small towns, indulge in local delicacies, and take the kind of back roads immortalized in country songs. The divorce settlement was simple. Kyle retained his investments and retirement accounts, while Whitney kept the penthouse and her trust fund. The luxury SUV, largely financed by her extravagant spending, was a small, satisfying consolation for him. As the miles stretched behind him, Kyle felt the weight of freedom. The company he had built, Taylor and Son, would likely falter without him. George's incompetence would ensure its demise, while Kyle's new venture, built on innovations he had quietly developed, would thrive. The thought of George's downfall brought a satisfied smirk to his face. Whitney, meanwhile, was unraveling. Back at Rebecca's house, she dissolved into tears once more, realizing her carefully rehearsed excuses were futile. She had planned to tell Kyle her affairs were meaningless, mere tools to strengthen their relationship or further their mutual goals. But even she knew how hollow that sounded. Kyle had been steadfast in his commitment to their marriage. Forgiveness was not an option. As Kyle embraced his newfound freedom and brighter future, Whitney faced the wreckage of her choices. Her once glamorous life was crumbling around her, piece by irreparable piece. For months, she had understood that her marriage was irreparably broken, but the sight of their apartment stripped of his belongings drove the truth home with brutal force. She sank to the floor, her sobs raw and unrestrained, condemning herself for the hubris that had brought her to this point. The reasons for her actions lingered in her mind, yet she couldn't find it within herself to believe them. She had never truly anticipated consequences, and even if they came, she had assumed her gentle, naive husband would pardon her. For 3 years, her betrayals had gone unchecked, but now he had destroyed her world in a single night, leaving her to sift through the rubble of her shattered reputation and life. Kyle's past week had been a whirlwind. After setting up his new phone, he discarded the old one, SIM card removed, into a slushy street, severing the final connection to his former existence. His move to Texas had been carried out with precision, every step meticulously planned. Throughout the week, he'd sent a string of emails that detonated like grenades, each one tailored for maximum impact. Each recipient, a spouse, was left grappling with the unraveling of their marriage. The chaos he orchestrated brought a satisfied smirk to his face. Rebecca's husband had been among the last to receive his email, just the day before. Kyle couldn't help but chuckle, imagining Al's response. Whitney's infidelity was her own undoing, but Rebecca's involvement couldn't be overlooked. Rebecca's vivid accounts of her escapades, along with her encouragement for Whitney to adopt a similarly reckless lifestyle, had fanned the flames. 4 days later, Rebecca and Whitney found themselves in their shared apartment, now occupied solely by the two of them, as Al had expelled Rebecca after reading Kyle's email. The email contained 5 incriminating video clips and a damning recording of Rebecca and Whitney. In the audio, the two women gleefully detailed their affairs, mocking their oblivious husbands and naming their lovers. Furious, Al shared the recording with the wives of nearly every man mentioned in the conversation, most of whom he knew personally. The fallout spread like wildfire. Al watched with grim satisfaction as the chaos unfolded. Another man named George faced his own reckoning. His father, disgusted by his actions, not only dismissed him from the family business, but also revoked his inheritance. Alongside George, the company's upper management, tarnished by the scandal, was entirely replaced. George's father assumed the role of interim CEO, while Helen, newly promoted to vice president of talent acquisition, began recruiting top executives from across the globe to rebuild the firm. As for Kyle, his transition continued smoothly. He passed the MLK exit, turned onto Cesar Chavez, and caught a fleeting view of Lady Bird Lake as he neared the Austin Convention Center. Crossing Congress Avenue, he reached the luxurious high-rise condo at 70 Rainey, a temporary residence provided by his new employer. With 6 months of rent prepaid, Kyle had time to search for his ideal home, one with a spacious yard, mature trees, and room for the dog he planned to adopt. In his mind, he envisioned a fresh start with a partner who valued loyalty and the prospect of building a life together, complete with children. His colleagues had already arranged a welcome barbecue where he'd be introduced as recently divorced, ensuring plenty of opportunities to meet single women. Meanwhile, back in New York, the storm Kyle had unleashed continued to escalate. Betrayed spouses retaliated with their own revelations, unearthing even more secrets and intensifying the havoc. Helen kept Kyle informed of the ongoing turmoil. As he reflected on the chain reaction he had set in motion, Kyle felt a profound sense of liberation. Far removed from the destruction, he embraced the peace of his new life in Texas. For the first time in years, he felt truly unburdened and free. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.